Ding.
Wow.
Okay.
That's one of them. That's beautiful.
Where did we get to? Verse 30. We didn't get down to verse 30.
I make them all king size. That way I don't have to worry about size of them.
We got to the weeping, didn't we?
We got to.
Yes.
Yes, you just defined weeping.
All right.
That's verse 39.
30, well, 33, somewhere up in here's where we are. Yeah.
35. You swept.
All right. But notice verse 34. Let's go back there for a moment. And because they're going to show Jesus where they, because he asked the question, where have you laid him? And they said unto him, Lord, come and see. Now, we made that statement. You know, a lot of times we get too, you're taking personal evangelism course, and sometimes we get too involved with telling people what they must do. And a lot of times all we need to do is offer the invitation, come and see. And, you know, we don't need to give this long explanation. Just come and see. Jesus did that in John chapter 1. You know, come and see. And so he offers them that invitation to come and see. Wonderful. All right, now, that was verse 34. Then Jesus wept. This is then the shortest verse in your English New Testament. It is not the shortest verse in the Greek New Testament, but in the English it is. The verb wept means to shed a tear. So Jesus is weeping. Now, why is he weeping? We have no idea. Could have been because of his grief, his emotion. It could have been because he was thinking of the Jew. You know, it could have been a lot of different reasons. And verse number 36, it says, Then said the Jews, Behold how he loved him. And some of them said, Could not this man which openeth the eyes of the blind, that's chapter 9, and calls us that even this man should not have died? So, the Jews saw the depth of his sorrow and his grief. Their question is designed to be ironical and contemptuous. If he could not open them, if he could open the man born blind's eyes, think then why he could not have kept Lazarus from dying. And you see, they're not thinking that Jesus could raise him from the dead. There's no one person in the group realized that Christ could raise Lazarus from the dead. That's why this is such an important chapter, is proving the divinity of Christ. And then in verse 38, we find again that Jesus, groaning in himself, cometh to the grave. It was a cave and a stone laid upon it. Maybe because of the attitudes of the Jews, the closed-mindedness of the Jews. And here was this tomb then, and there was a stone rolled upon. You remember what they did with Jesus' tomb? What they do? They rolled a stone, and then they sealed it. And that's significant. We'll talk about that when they sealed that. They had those Roman guards over there. We're going to talk about all of that. Because I'll tell you some of this now. You see, there's some who say that Jesus really didn't die. He just kind of swooned. It's called the swoon theory. And what he did then is he woke up. When they placed him in that tomb, he woke up because of the coldness of it. He pushed the stone away, overcome four trained men, combat-ready soldiers, overcame them. He went and grabbed Mary Magdalene. They went off to France and married and had children. That is the Holy Grail. Now, if you think that's funny, what is it? Brent? Dan Brown.
Sound Catholic.
That's his whole thing about the Holy Grail. When what's his name? Tom Hanks played that Holy Grail in that thing. The thing was finding not a chalice, but the descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene.
That's how the French aristocracy.
That's-
they are descendants
Of Jesus.
How
That's
they
right.
would be
Fr-
considered holy and head of the church.
That's French aristocracy. Yeah. Anyway, so
And it ended up being his girlfriend in the movie the whole time.
Part of it.
So there is then all of that we think is far-fetched, but there are people who, there are several theories along those lines. And one in Matthew, he deals with one of those in the book of Matthew about, the soldiers slept. Let me tell you something. If the soldiers slept, how did they know who stole the body of Christ? Now, while soldiers, if they're sleeping on duty, what was the penalty?
Yeah.
That's right. Read the book of Acts. All right. So and you got to read all of Matthew, and they'll find that the Jews said that we'll take care of that. Don't worry about
That's
that.
called the Da Vinci Code.
Okay. Anyway, there is then all of that takes place. All right. So,
We don't take any notes on that Dan Brown thing.
no, that won't.
Google him.
Yeah, that won't be a part. I can guarantee that won't part of the test. Okay. I already know what the last.
We have angels in me.
Here is the stone. Then I wanted to make mention of that. Okay. And Jesus then tells her, where is that? Take away the stone. Verse 39. All right. So they're going to take away the stone. Does he want, and think about this now, how they're thinking. Does he just want to go in and see the body of his friend? Is that what he's doing? And Martha is practical. And she says, the smell is going to be great. I don't know if y'all have ever smelled a dead deer alongside of the road. Yeah. Well, so anyway, she did not fully comprehend what Jesus meant with the statement that he's making, okay? But she was about to learn what Jesus is talking about, raising Lazarus from the dead. And Jesus reminds her, verse 40, then, if thou believest that thou shouldest see the glory of God. So she's fixing to see the glory of God. And here is then that power of God raising Lazarus from the dead.
He already raised.
There's been several. Every funeral that Jesus saw, he disrupted. He raised somebody from the dead.
He even raised that one daughter from the dead, and he wasn't even near the house.
Yes. A lot of things like that. All right, verses, where do we get to? 41 through 44. We talked about some of this. They took away the stone. Then in verse 41, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. He's already heard me. He already knows what he's going to ask. So you heard me. And I know that thou hearest me always. But because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. When he had thus spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. Now there's some significance with this. All right, Jesus then, they take away the stone. Jesus prays, number one, for thanksgiving. Number two, he prays for instruction to the people. Number three, he's praying for unity between him and God. He's praying for the harmony that is between them.
Between him and God.
Yep. Are you caught up?
Is that number 4?
Yes, that's number 4. The harmony is number 4. Number 5 is the prayer for the Father's approval of Jesus' action. The miracle that's about to be performed. Now, notice what Jesus does. He cried with a loud voice. And notice he doesn't say come forth, but he says, Lazarus, come forth. Because if he would have said come forth, guess what?
All of it.
That's right. Everybody. All right. When he says come forth, that's going to be it. Okay. But he's specific about here. And he says Lazarus. Now, does Lazarus dilly-dally? Does he have to call him again? Does he have to go in there and shake him? No, we find that Lazarus responds immediately. And he that was dead came forth. Okay. The grave closed.
I do have one question about this story.
Okay.
Did
It's not a
Lazarus?
story, by the way.
Oh, well, I mean, true story. But like, did Lazarus? Do you think he had any memory of paradise? Like when he came back here?
He may have, but that doesn't really mean anything. I mean, I know we have people who say they go there and see all those kind of things, but in Luke 16, there's a great gulf fixed. So once you pass that way, you cannot come back. Okay? And they talk about CPR. When I was an EMT, and I had a paramedic tell me that very few people that they've done CPR on really make it back. Okay. I've never had anybody that I've done CPR on make it. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I'm just saying it's few and far between.
Men said that if they do survive, they can't fight.
Yeah, because the length of time of they're without oxygen to the brain. So what people do in an emotional state, in a highly emotional state, is unreliable. Okay. Some people say they see Jesus and all this kind of stuff. And I've asked somebody what it said that they say. I said, were you in a highly emotional state? She said, yes. No, okay. Our mind can play tricks on us like that. I don't have the answer to that. The Bible does not say that one way or the other. Okay. So I don't know. If you want my short answer, I don't know. Okay. Because we're not going to find much about Lazarus except that they're going to try to kill him after this. This will kind of be the last thing that we know about him pretty much.
Is this the same Lazarus in Luke 16?
I don't think so. I think this is more of a common name like we would use Joe.
Mm-hmm.
How
many Johns are?
Yeah. John, Paul.
Jesus is very common.
I was going to say Joe Smith, and I happen to know a man by the name of Joe Smith. So, but we use things like that. John Doe, somebody that we,
Dr. McClendon.
yeah. So, yes, I think that's, if you'll read some commentaries on Luke 16, that Lazarus there is more or less a common name, and that's why he used that. Although he doesn't name the rich man.
Because Lazarus here is not a poor.
No.
Like that Lazarus.
That's right.
Poor to beggar.
That's right. So I don't believe this Lazarus and that Lazarus is the same Lazarus. All right. Now, so then Jesus tells the people to take off then those clothes. Let him loose. Okay? Loose him and let him go. Because they wound you up. So they had to unwind him. Okay? And here is the effects then of this miracle, verse 45. And many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen these things which Jesus did, believed on him. But some of them went their ways to the Pharisees and told them what things Jesus had done. I'm going to tell on you. Okay. All right. Now, we talked about the woman at the well. Because of her testimony, they came out, and then they turned around and says, when they heard Jesus, it's not because of what you said, but now we've heard with our own voice that we believe that Jesus is the Christ. So here are some people then are seeing these miracles. And what's the purpose of the miracles? To prove that Jesus is the Christ. So this is getting the job done. All right.
Jesus himself says that in verse 14. they may believe that.
Yeah, sent me. All right. So many of the Jews then believed on him. It was the Jews which came and mourned with Mary at the tomb. And so it was just some of the Jews. It was not all of the Jews, but some of the Jews believed this. Not everybody believes these miracles, which they.
He turned Israel upside down.
That's right. Well, he turned it right side up, really, if you.
Yeah. But just the impact he had.
So in your evangelism class, understand something too, that not everybody you talk to is going to be converted. Jesus did not convert everybody he talked to. And we've got to keep that in mind. They're not rejecting you. Okay. You've got to keep
God adds the increase.
Yeah. And that's hard to accept sometimes. Why did the Jews go to the Pharisees? Okay. And what were the Pharisees trying to do? All right. And that's why they went to that, and they knew that. So now, because then they went to the Jews, we're going to find here's the verse 47 and 48. Here's this gathering then of the council. Okay. Gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees a council. What do ye? For this man doth many miracles. Understand, here is that plurality. But here's the one then. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him. And now watch where they go to. And the Romans shall come and take away both our place and our nation. So what are they concerned with? Not the truth, but their position and their power. That's what they're concerned with. And when we get people concerned about that, they're not concerned about what spiritual things are. And we need to watch that in the church. When men get to the point where they're more concerned about their position and their power, then they need to be shaken and they need to be gotten back to where they need to be. Okay. They need to be converted back to Christ. All right, so here's action then that needs to be taken, and we need to take it now. And we're going to find that they are in that process. The influence of Jesus was affecting them politically and their position with the Roman government.
That's a question.
Okay.
It says here the chief priests and the Pharisees. I always thought of it being like you had a high priest, there's only one of them.
Not necessarily.
And then you had priests. And this is about a chief priest. And you said it might be more than one high priest at a time?
Yes. At that time there was. Now, when it was established, it was only the oldest descendant of Aaron. If you go back to the very beginning when this was established, and this is in the book of Exodus, when it was established then, it was always the oldest male descendant of Aaron. All right. But at this time, it became more of a political thing, and there were two high priests. When you study then the trials of Jesus, there is a Annas and a Caiaphas, I believe it is the two names of the high priest.
Verse 49 speaks of God.
All right, there's one. But there is, and I think it's either his father or his father-in-law also is a high priest. And so it became more of a political power.
I remember in the Testament period, there's some people that weren't even Levites that were bought the office of high priest.
Now that was under Jeroboam. You know, when the split in that was when they were destroyed in 975, when the kingdom split and went off into Israel and Judah. And Jeroboam set up the calf worshiping down in Bethel. He also changed the priesthood. He changed the place, and he changed the time, and he changed the priesthood. And those people could buy. Now, I don't know of buying and selling in the New Testament of those things. I know that they were, the political power. And I don't know about the other there. So, but I know that happened, and there could be the influence of that then happening on them. So the Jews were under Roman rule. Their concept of the Messiah was clouding their true judgment against Christ. Now, they had a preconceived idea. They were prejudiced. They thought he would come in riding on a mule. Now, we think mule's not a kingly, but David rode a mule. Jesus rode on a colt then into Jerusalem, showing his humility, but also showing his kingship. So, three things that they were concerned with. They were concerned with their power, their position, and their penny. That's why I like my alliteration, so I have, yes, sir.
Have you ever listened to Ben Shapiro? He's usually on the internet, so he's a political guy,
Yeah.
Jewish. And it's interesting to hear him, because every now and then he'll get off into his religion. He's an Orthodox Jew. And he still believes that Messiah is going to come
Right.
and rule the world.
Yep.
Establish a
The
kingdom.
kingdom.
Just like they did back in the first century.
Yes. Years ago, I was watching PBS, and they were doing a thing on the Jewish, and they were looking for a red heifer. And they were looking for a red heifer without spot. And they said, we just haven't found it. But when we find the red heifer without spot, we know the Messiah is not far behind. I don't know where they came up with this idea. So, all right. So verses 49 through 52, we're going to talk about Caiaphas. He was the high priest that same year. Okay. That's why we know then it was a political power then. He was a member of the Sanhedrin. All right, we're going to have another problem with the... I've got 10 minutes on the free, so we'll have to do it again. So hang with me there. I'll get back and we'll get through with this class, okay? He held the high priest office from 18 to 36 AD. That year is also talking about the notable year of the Lord. And that's made reference to Jesus when he was reading in the synagogue one time. He talked about the notable year of the Lord, and that has reference to that. They let Jesus die, and that settles a lot of their problems. Better than one die than all of us suffer. Okay? And they could see no other alternatives but to let Jesus die. He was influenced then to utter a prophecy of the vicarious sacrificial death of Jesus. Okay. Verse 52 then, and for the not for the ocean, but the once you gather together in one children of God that were scattered abroad. Let's see, where did I see my first? Oh, other sheep, Jesus talks about in John chapter 10 and verse 16. Here's the reconciling of both Jews and Gentiles into one body, Ephesians chapter 2, verses 13 through 16. And when we read stuff like this, I think it shows the unity of our Bible. And here he's talking about then for the people. This really, the background of all of this goes back to Genesis chapter 12. In thee shall all nations of the earth be blessed.
They have scrolls of them that have all the promises.
Yes.
Because Isaiah is complete.
Yes. Yes. So what's your reaction? I mean, what they didn't believe they didn't believe it. You see, they had the idea that Jesus would come into this riding on a mighty steed. He would overcome then the Roman, and he would set up his kingdom and rule, just like David, just like Solomon. He would be a warrior king. And they thought then that the Jewish power would come back to them. And the apostles, that's why then John's mother comes to him and says, I want you to set my sons up on the right hand and the left hand, because she's thinking of a world power. In Acts chapter 1, the disciples come and Jesus and says, well, thou at this time, he says, you don't understand. And it wasn't until later that they understood. I think in Acts chapter 2, they begin to understand. But you understand that the apostles, they might have had revelation, but they did not have complete understanding. It took them time to develop the understanding that they needed to understand what Jesus was talking about. That's right. And we need to have that sympathy when we're teaching other people that they've got to come out from that stuff. And it's hard for them to give that up. Reaction of the council. Verse 53. Then from that day forth, they took counsel together how to put him to death. So what Caiaphas said was adopted by the council, and Jesus was going to die. Whatever it takes. And they're going to lie. There's so much falsehood that goes on when Jesus trials, just illegal from start to finish. And have people lie about him. Thus, Christ would be killed illegally. Now, Jesus is going to leave them, verse 54. Jesus, therefore, walked no more openly among the Jews, but went thence to a country near the wilderness, into a place, into the city called Ephraim, and there continued with his disciples. Okay. So Jesus leaves until the time is right. Jesus had more to do to prepare his disciples. You understand, John 14 is really not written to us, it's written to his disciples. Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me, in my Father's house. Let not your heart be troubled. Go back and see John 14, 15, and 16 in his speech. 17 says prayer. But he's talking to his disciples, preparing them for his death. They're still not prepared for his death. And he's got to go up here then, and he's going to prepare them. Now, verse 55 talks about the Passover. Okay. All right. And the Jews' Passover was nigh at hand. This is going to be the last Passover. So we're getting the last. What I'm saying is there's going to be Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Resurrection. Okay. So we're dealing with then when he's meeting with his disciples, when he washes their feet, all of these things, this is the last Passover. So we've dealt with 3 years pretty much. All right, so here is the Passover was nigh at hand, and many went out of the country up into Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. Okay, so they're going through that process of purification, and then sought they for Jesus, and spake among themselves as they stood in the temple. What think ye? That he will not come to the feast? And both the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a commandment that if any man knew where he were, that he should show it, that they might take him. Okay. So, this is the reference then to where Jesus was going. Then he's going to enter into Jerusalem, that triumphant entry then. This is the Passover, was the last it was one of the great feasts, and this was the last for Jesus. Now watch how in the book of John, when he says, my hour is not yet come, he's going to change. My hour now is. Okay. They thought that Jesus wouldn't show himself in Jerusalem because the Jews sought to kill him. And to kill him, their minds was already made up. In the face of this notable miracle. That's like in Acts chapter 4. You'd see a notable miracle in Acts chapter 3 and in Acts chapter 4, really. Here's the healing of that man and a notable, and they call it a notable miracle. And their reaction to that then. All right. John chapter 12. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, and which was dead, whom he raised from the dead. So, chapter 11 really ends the public ministry of Jesus. Chapter 12 and verse 1 is less than 6 days until Jesus dies.
I got a question.
All right?
Here it's talking about him with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus and all, but yet we just ended chapter 11 saying he left,
Yes.
that he left Bethany,
Yes.
and now he's there. This is
You,
like,
when,
back in time
yeah.
again.
yes, you can't write a history and then just, you've got, sometimes you've got to go back.
Going back to
Yeah.
the Lazarus dying.
Right. Right. Okay, it's got less than a minute, so we're going to have a little break here. And as soon as I can get back online and get things back up, as soon as if it goes off, then we'll get into this. But we're all right. Jesus is anointed with a very precious ointment, getting ready for his burial. That's why she anointed his feet. It was to prepare him then. Okay, for that burial. This was done at Lazarus, Martha, and Mary's house. The ointment was about 12 ounces. It was from an East Indian plant. Now, Guy and Wood says in his commentary that it was worth $500.